Welcome to the First Friday Show. I'm Mililani Trask, and I'll be your hostess for this September 7th edition of First Friday, the Unauthorized News. If you're joining us tonight, and it is September 7th, then you're watching a live show being filmed at Olelo on the island of Oahu. We welcome your calls or your comments for tonight's show. The number is 834-2886. 834-2886. Tonight we'll be taking a look at bringing back a story that we covered several months ago. Joining me tonight, Professor Manu Kaiama from the Schneider School of Business. Welcome back, our commentator.
Aloha.
And also we're happy to bring back tonight with a very happy ending, Trustee Hulu Lindsey, trustee from the island of Maui, who joins us to give us an update on her conversations with Governor Abercrombie. Welcome back to the show, Hulu.
Thank you for having me, Mililani.
Before we get to taking a look at our main topics tonight, which is the announcement that Trustee Lindsey will be running after her discussion with the governor, and also looking at some very important things that are happening at OHA, including some educational workshops going on now in the islands. But before we get to that, let's take a look at the unauthorized news section, beginning with the military buildup in Kaneohe and in Hawaii.
Okay, aloha ladies.
Aloha.
I have the privilege of doing this story. I live on that side of the island of Oahu, and we've all been informed via the news that the new focus for the military is going to be the Asia-Pacific region, and that all eyes now are turning to Hawaii. The military has already at least 161 installations here across our Pai'aina, taking up approximately 237,000 acres of our land. These lands, let's remind our audience that these are, for the most part, our crown and government, what other people call our ceded lands. On the island of Oahu specifically, they occupy approximately 22% of our land mass. So to hear that we are going to have to be the hostess of even more military can be a little bit problematic. Kaneohe residents just this last month experienced some unusual flying, and the reason it was unusual was because they were hearing this noise during the night, from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock to midnight, and so many concerned citizens called in their legislative representatives and said, "What's going on in Kaneohe?" Basically, they were told that, you know, it's a part of RIMPAC, and also there are going to be new aircraft stationed in Kaneohe, and for them to realize that this is actually going to be what is going to be the state of that ahupua'a for probably in the next 2 years for that time and what follows. So basically they said, when we did some of our research, and they have been announcing this, Inouye has gone forward and said back in, I guess, April of this year, that we were going to have approximately 2,700 more Marines and their families being stationed here, and probably in the Kaneohe district. And then we also learned more recently that they're going to be bringing 24 Ospreys, which are a type of helicopter airplane which will be located at the Kaneohe Marine Base Air Corps Station. 15, I guess they're called Cobra attack aircrafts, and 12 Huey utility helicopters. And we might recall that the Huey helicopters were actually first going to be doing some of their landing and taking off exercises in Kalaupapa, but I believe the community there was able to say, no, you guys can't be doing that. So that's now on, you know, the back burner. I don't think they've been allowed to do that. So we're really looking at for tonight, looking at these Ospreys, okay? And the idea of these MV-22 Ospreys is that the military is insisting that they're safe. Japan came out strongly against them, okay? They said no. When the United States of America wanted to have them deployed at Yamaguchi and Okinawa, Japan said, we don't want them here, okay? They're not safe, they're dangerous. And if you go and you do your research, you find that they say that these types of helicopter / airplanes are accident prone, they're a threat to the natural environment, they fly low and they cut into trees. They've been known to actually start forest fires, excuse me. Back in 2000, they actually grounded the fleet after 2 fatal crashes that killed 23 people. You know, then 4 months ago, this year, a crash killed 2 Marines in Morocco using the same type of aircraft. And 2 months ago, a crash happened in Florida, and all 5 of the crew members aboard were seriously injured. So, you know, in order to address these concerns of the community, the military has come back and they have said, you know, these are safe aircraft, but actually they're tricky to fly because they do go from a helicopter to an airplane. They can transform from one type of aircraft to the others. And I don't know if that necessarily makes us feel better if our homes are in Kaneohe, that, oh, the aircraft is safe, but they're tricky to fly. So what they're saying is that most of these injuries and crashes were caused by pilot error. Well, how do pilots become better? They practice. Where do they practice? Well, it looks like 24 of these helicopters, or Ospreys, as they call them, will be practicing in Kaneohe. So, of course, the community is quite upset about this. The community feels like they haven't had much say in about this additional, 27,000 Marines. And we have to keep in mind that these 27,000 Marines coming, that was announced back in April of this year. Just recently, Inouye has announced that we're going to have 1,000 more military personnel coming, okay, along with 1,100 of their dependents, their families. I think what is worrisome for the people of Hawaii is we really do not have the infrastructure to support this type of influx of about 5,000 new people. The roads in Kaneohe can't support it. We've got a sewer system that is ancient, that's falling apart. How exactly are we going to be able to accommodate so many new people coming in, especially to a specific ahupua'a, Kaneohe?
You know, I really agree with that. I think we have to take a look at what we can sustain in terms of more people moving in. But when I saw this, you know, my first reaction was remembering when Senator Solomon was here on the show. We talked a little bit about the case that she had brought to ensure that 120,000 military residents would not be given the right to vote on the island of Oahu. So I'm glad that that was cleared up before this new troop allocation moves forward. But you know, when I looked at it, I was thinking to myself, in all of the articles, there's no mention of what it's going to cost the Department of Defense and the U.S. taxpayers to move these thousands of troops out of Japan. And when I looked at it, I was surprised to find out that there's no mention of any cost for the Department of Defense because the U.S. government is not paying to relocate these troops. Instead, the government of Japan will pick up a tab of 3.1 billion U.S. dollars so that they can move these troops out of their country. The government of Japan initially had agreed to pay as much as $6 billion to get these troops out of their country, but they're now moving to Hawaii, and I don't know if I'm happy or not that we won't have to be paying for the move because they're still coming back here. In any event, let's take a look at our next story. But before we get there, I have to correct some misinformation that we gave out on our last show. On our last show, we talked about a complaint that had been filed by Trustee Roena Akana against Trustee Haunani Apoliona. The crux of the complaint was that Apoliona had been sitting on the board of a local bank handling the transaction. At that time, I misspoke, and I said that she was sitting on the board of First Hawaiian Bank. That is incorrect. Haunani Apoliona has been a board member of Bank of Hawaii for many years, and it is Bank of Hawaii that is now handling this transaction, getting the deal approved with a vote from Haunani Apoliona. We'll clarify this in our show next month when Trustee Roena Akana will be making an appearance to talk about her ethics complaint against Trustee Haunani Apoliona. In the meantime, some interesting news develops with the Hawaiian Homeland's lessees. For the first time in the history of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, lessees are getting together on different islands to rate the performance of a director. That person is Joby Masagatani, who was recently appointed by Governor Abercrombie to take the place of the leaving chair who went back to live on the Big Island. What has happened is that the beneficiaries of the DHHL from a group called AINA, which has members from Waimanalo, Papakolea, Nanakuli, Kapolei, and other Hawaiian homesteaders on Hawaii, Molokai, and Maui Islands, have all got together, reviewed Masagatani's performance this first quarter, first 3 months, and given her a report card with an A on it. Why? Things are moving forward finally after years of delay. The good news is that the USDA Rural Development monies for water finally moving forward. That's $15 million. That's been delayed for 3 years for DHHL lessees. We've now had groundbreaking for 45 new lots in Waimanalo and another 51 lots, Pi'ilani, Maikekai. This is in Anahola on the island of Kauai. Also the announcement that there will be soon groundbreaking for Lalamilo on the Big Island for an additional 83 lots. Good news for Hawaiian homesteaders who have waited in these areas for years to have these projects move forward. What's really happening? Well, it appears that Robin Danner and her organization, the HCDC, are not making the rapid progress they had thought, and because of reviews now of the Danner projects at Anahola, the solar projects, and now the review of the Attorney General's office, it appears that those plans will be slowed down because due diligence was not conducted by the past DHHL chair. Because of this, Danner and her group are threatening to come into the Senate to block the confirmation of Masagatani. I think it's going to be a difficult time for them, but I'm glad to see beneficiaries having their needs met and a report card being issued, and I hope this AINA group continues to do this. It's good to have lessees take a look at and rate their chairman and their commissioners. Give them a report card at least once a year. Now, take a look at the decision of the Hawaii Supreme Court relating to archaeological protection and the rail.
Okay, so this is really interesting. On August 24th, the Hawaii Supreme Court unanimously supported Paulette Kalekini, and they said that the city should have completed its archaeological surveys in downtown Honolulu before starting construction on the project. So our warrior, Paulette Kalekini, had been suing to say, hey, you did not follow the law regarding surveying for Native Hawaiian burial sites. Basically, the Supreme Court, they put forward an 82-page ruling, okay, saying that they agreed with her, finding that the city and state misinterpreted the law when it came to sacred Hawaiian burial places. Now, the city had argued that it could probably perform their survey work in segments since the rail project was going to be constructed in segments. But the court disagreed. They said that finding that the city should have completed an archaeological inventory survey known as an AIS, okay, that looked at the entire scope of the project all the way from Kapolei to Ala Moana prior to breaking ground. So here we go, same old story. Right? We were talking about this before the show. They always go head first, do everything, break the law, and then we need to find Native people who are willing to go and sue them and make them enforce the laws that we have on the books. What do you think of that?
You know, I think what I think of it is that this is going to cause another round of delays. And what I think everyone is waiting for is to see how far up it's going to push the price tag. Because now the court is requiring that the entire length of the rail system be assessed for archaeological inventory as well as burials. So this is going to delay, and it's going to require that expertise be brought in. We're already looking at significant budget overruns. I think that there might be another several million being added as a result of the Supreme Court decision. But you know, I'll tell you one thing. Once again, the courts are affirming that they will protect our historic properties, and they're not just for the Hawaiian people, but everyone. So good thing for all developers to heads up and not try to step around the law. This is what happened with Linda Lingo as well when she tried to avoid the law and environmental impact statement. Playing those kind of games, you know, it's not going to go anywhere.
Right.
And now our last unauthorized news piece story, taking a look at the hysterical and controversial hearings that have been going on in the neighbor islands relating to the Public Land Development Corporation. The Public Land Development Corporation, also known as the PLDC, was created in 2011 by the legislature. Its purpose is to develop state lands for numerous things, including community facilities, repairing harbors, and even energy production, which I have been championing, but to do so with a trust obligation to ensure that there is an economic, social, and environmental benefit to the people of Hawaii. What has happened at public hearings on the rules is that Hawaiians and others, primarily environmentalists, turned up en masse to call for the repeal of the PLDC, citing the fact that the PLDC will be ignoring Hawaiian burial sites, historic properties, environmental impact statement, archaeological assessment, that they were somehow exempt from these restrictions and also had broad powers of condemnation. Well, as the dust settles, it turns out it was all a lie. Why do we know this? Nearly 1 year ago, in October 2011, the labor unions of our state put forth a list of questions about the PLDC, which they took to Senator Don Dela Cruz, the proponent of this measure. They asked him to clarify it, and he then sent it to the AG's office for an opinion, which came down in October. The opinion says that the Public Land Development Corporation is not exempt from the state environmental impact laws. It is not exempt from Chapter 343. It is not exempt from Hawaii Revised Statute 6E, and so it is not exempt from doing an inventory of archaeological properties. What you had just said was an IAS, the Inventory of Archaeological Survey, nor does it have any power of condemnation. All of this information was withheld from the Hawaiian community in these public workshops that preceded the hearings that were sponsored by a number of environmental groups, including Life of the Land and the Sierra Club. Well, when I went to testify last week, Thursday, and I announced that it was all hysteria over misinformation provided from the environmental groups, people were quite shocked. I then received a call from someone who was at the hearings. They sent to me the testimony of Henry Curtis, the executive director of Life of the Land, who presented this testimony last week, Thursday, to the PLDC board and Lord Haraguchi. In his testimony, he says, Hawaii electric industry lends employees to the legislature, to the Public Utilities Commission, to the university, and to the military for a period of 6 months to a year. This lending practice is hidden from the public, who don't need to know that they, as ratepayers, are financing entanglements between regulators, regulatees, policymakers, and university educators. I was extremely upset by that testimony, and I wanted to find out, are Hawaiian Electric employees working at the Public Utilities Commission? And if so, under what circumstances, and who are they actually working for? Sent an email with the testimony over to the Public Utilities Commission, and this afternoon I received a response from Hermina Morita, chair of the Hawaii PUC. She says this, Aloha Mililani, thank you for bringing Life of the Land's testimony to my attention. I want to clarify for the record that Hawaiian Electric has never offered to lend an employee to the Public Utilities Commission, nor would I ever accept such an offer. During my tenure as a legislator, there were private organizations that had legislative internship programs. As chair of the House Committee on Energy and Environment, I did accept 2 HECO employees as interns. However, it was my internal office policy that these interns not work on energy or environmental legislation. They handled the Women's Caucus legislative issues, where I was co-chair, or my constituent concerns. In 2004, the private sector legislative internship program was terminated by House leadership. Catching Life of the Land and Henry Curtis in another blatant lie. Now we have members of the House and Senate calling for repeal of the Public Land Development Corporation. I myself have come out publicly in support of it for the simple reason that from 1959 to the present, the practice in our state has been to lease out our trust lands to the Big Five, to the U.S. military, to corporations that were foreign corporations, corporations from the mainland. And these leases were given for private development without restriction or without requirement. Although these were trust lands, those developing them never had to bring back any benefit to the people of this state, who are the beneficiaries and the owners of these lands. Finally, we're moving in the right direction by having the state trustee take the reins to develop our state trust lands under our Constitution, under our burial laws, and under our historic preservation laws. And another thing I'm happy about is that finally, we, the beneficiaries of the state, public and native together, are going to be in a position to stop inappropriate development. In the past, we couldn't do much about it because private developers leasing our lands had a right to develop resorts and other developments for their benefit. But as long as the state trustee stays involved, the beneficiaries of this state will have the power to go into court to enforce these protections in a way that we have defined them as the native people of Hawaii. No doubt the PLDC has some problems. When you confront that kind of a thing, you have to address it. Finally, one other thing, testimony was given by Hawaiians that this was a new effort on the part of the state to create a state development corporation. This was the first time this revolutionary approach was being taken. They're very opposed to it. Well, that was also a lie. This isn't the first time. Prior to statehood, the first public corporation was developed, and it was developed to put together affordable housing. This is what we know today as the Hawaii Housing Authority. It was created in the mid-1930s. And then in the 1960s, a second state development corporation was created. This is the State Agricultural Development Corporation. They exist to take our public and native ceded lands and ensure that agriculture, the growing of food, and our food security is protected for residents. This is, in fact, the third effort to move forward with a specially empowered body to oversee development of the state lands. And I'm happy to say that for the first time in the history of this state, Hawaiians will finally be able to track development beyond the pre-development stage to make sure that we do get environmental, economic, and social benefits. I'm in support of it. I know others are not.
How can I respond to that? I think that, respectfully so, and we do need to move on, but I'm not in favor of it. I think that you can't deny that the way that law is written currently is seriously flawed, that we need to go in and we need to make some adjustments to it if we're going to, in fact, embrace it. I feel that environmentalists have been on the side of Native peoples for a very long time, so I wouldn't want to just throw them under the rug and say, now they're not in favor of us because we have this opportunity. What I would like is for the law to say exactly what it plans to do. For example, excuse me, in the law was written, you know, that they could sell or exchange these trust lands. And then all the testimony was saying, oh, we have no intention to do that. If you have no intention to do that, then that's what should be written in the words that we have, in the verbiage that we're reading in the law. So I felt that there are so many changes that need to be made. And just addressing really fast the idea of, well, we do still maintain the right to sue, to keep them accountable, to make sure that they are following all these other protections that we have. That's difficult to do. That's really difficult for a group of people or for a person to go forward to say, to first of all being the watchdog and saying, look, here they are, and they're not following this environmental protection that we work so hard to have. And we say, okay, well, then I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to file suit and I'm going to get an attorney to represent me. So I think there are serious considerations that we need to consider and we need to address before we go forward and before I am able to wrap my arms around this type of legislation.
You know, I'm glad that you mentioned the concern about the sale of the ceded lands. That was one of the things that just astounded me. We even got letters from professors at the Center for Hawaiian Studies objecting to the PLDC law because of the sale of ceded lands. You know, when I see something as ignorant as that, it just is astounding to me, for the simple reason that the hearing was relating to the Public Land Development Corporation, which is Act 55 that passed in 2011. Folks, the legislature passed a bill allowing the sale of the ceded lands in 2009. That was Act 176. It allows for sale of the ceded lands with a 2/3 vote of the Senate. There isn't any way you're going to change the law to sell ceded lands by coming in to object to the rules of the Public Land Development Corporation. You're not even testifying on the right bill, folks. Hawaiians who want to repeal the bill allowing the sale of the ceded lands, take a look at Act 176. Talk with people in the legislature and maybe at OHA if you want to repeal that. But one thing you can't do is repeal the ceded land sale law by testifying on a totally different act. And this is the thing that gets me upset.
Right.
Because people like Henry Curtis, Robert Harris knew that the Hawaiian community would be uninformed. They could have done workshops, passed out the Attorney General opinions, informed people, bring them in with written testimony. Instead, they went throughout the community lying, telling Hawaiians that burials were being desecrated, heiaus would now be bulldozed. They caused mass hysteria and anger, and I think it's going to turn around on them when Hawaiians find out that it was all a lie. This teaches us one thing. There is no excuse for not doing our own research and verifying what is told to us in the community. I've done a lot of work with environmentalists. I have never trusted them or anyone else. It is our job to protect our people, and there's no reason to go forward in the legislative process making a fool out of yourself, presenting testimony that is incorrect because you didn't bother to do your own research. Hawaiian community, learn from this. Don't be blindly trusting people like Henry Curtis. You'll make a fool of yourself and your peoples on TV. I welcome the hearings coming up to repeal the PLDC. I can honestly say I've been there and done that. Bill tried to move this session, couldn't even get through the House of Representatives. But now let's take a look at the good news that we have. You know, a few months ago we ran a story about Governor Abercrombie's restriction, that he had imposed a restriction on the trustee from Maui that prevented her from running for elective office. This was something that we had called on the governor to change. We talked in our story about a letter that had been taken to the governor by 4 of the trustees of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. This letter asked him to please reconsider his restriction on Trustee Hulu Lindsey, to lift that restriction, to let her run. That letter was dated April 23rd, 2012. And now here to give us an update on the outcomes is Trustee Hulu Lindsey herself. Welcome back to the show, Trustee.
Thank you, Mililani.
Can you first start out by giving us just a little family background and then tell us about how you had met with the governor?
Thank you. My family background includes 3 beautiful children, and born and raised in Kohala, Hawaii, Waimea, Hawaii, and Keaukaha, Hawaii Island. But I moved to Maui 41 years ago. Maui is home for me. Thank you for having me back. I really appreciate it.
I think this is an important story, and I think many listeners and many who were not Hawaiian became involved in the Let Hulu Run campaign. But only you know what occurred because only you met with the governor.
Well, you know, Mililani, my word is very, very important to me. My integrity is very important. And I did say to all of those that supported me that if I did not get the governor's approval to run, I would not run. That is something I felt very strongly about. So I really, really thank those people that have written to the governor asking that the restriction on me be lifted. I especially thank my colleagues, the 4 trustees that wrote the letter to the governor asking him to lift the restriction. And after they did that, which was in April, they kept encouraging me to go and see the governor. And that was something I didn't want to do. I didn't want the confrontation. I wanted him to know that I respected him. But I kept getting pushed and pushed. So finally I said, okay, I'm going to go see the governor. So I made an appointment, went up to see him, and we talked, and he said, let me think about it, Hulu. And I said, okay. He said, I'll let you know in a few days. I won't string you along. So I said, I really appreciate that, Governor. So left him, and a few days later, a few trustees traveled to Washington, D.C. for the draping of the Kamehameha Day statue for our Kamehameha. And while we were there, we were out to dinner one evening with some of our constituents, and Chair Colette Machado got a telephone call, and later on she discussed it with Trustee Akana and I, and she said that the governor called her to inform her that he was going to let me run for my seat. And I was just so elated. And you know, this is typical of Governor Abercrombie, because he always does the right thing. You know, he has so much aloha for us Hawaiians. And I know that he thought about it very carefully before he said yes. He said, though, that he felt that I had a constitutional right to run, and that he was not going to let his judgment supersede the judgment of the people of Hawaii, and let the people of Hawaii determine at the polls who they would like to have as their Maui trustee. So that was fine with me, and I really, really appreciated that.
You know, I was astounded when I first heard that this restriction was being imposed. And the reason why is because Abercrombie made several appointments. He made close to, I believe it was 15 or 16 appointments. And he appointed people in the Senate, Gil Kahele, Malama Solomon. He appointed Heather Juni in the House. So he appointed people to be in elected positions, but he didn't impose on them any restriction. And it didn't make sense to me that one restriction would have just been imposed on trustees for OHA. But later when we looked at it, we realized that what had happened was something that has happened many times in the past, and that is that there's a vacancy on the board. The OHA trustees that remain have several weeks to vote to fill the vacancy, but they don't, because they spend week after week bickering and fighting with each faction trying to get their friend in so that they can maintain a vote. And then under the law, the time runs out, and the choice has to go to the state governor, who's usually not a Hawaiian, who has to fill the vacancy. And this has happened many times. In fact, this is what happened with Trustee Don Cataluna. He was actually an appointee. But I have to say that I'm very happy to see that Governor Abercrombie stepped back. When I took a look at what was happening, I knew what had happened. The factions on OHA wanted to continue the fight through the election period, and they didn't want to allow another Hawaiian who was appointed to run, and they went to the governor to get him to impose the restriction. And I gotta say, the governor has done the right thing, and when I took a look at that written communication, he really nails it. Number one, let the decision go to the voters. He respects the right of the voters, all, Hawaiian and non-Hawaiian alike, to make their choice in the coming election. And number two, recognizing that every candidate has the right to run. And you know, on our last show, we were critical of the governor. And I had pointed out, you know, how many times has Neil Abercrombie exercised his constitutional right? And I like to believe that he thought about that and realized that this was a bigger issue than allowing a bunch of bickering trustees over at OHA to prevent voters from getting a chance to vote. I think he did the right thing, and I'm really glad to see it. And I'm hoping in the future that other governors will see and learn from this, so that there is no restriction ever opposed on a gubernatorial appointee. Even Gil Kahele or Senator Solomon, they should be allowed to run. You know, let's move on to these workshops that you were telling us about earlier. There's been some notices. These are the Kuleana land workshops that OHA is now hosting, and maybe you can start out by telling us a little bit about what's happening there. I understand some workshops are done, but others are still coming on neighbor islands.
Yes. Well, you know, I initiated these Kuleana workshops through our administration, mainly because I had an incident in Maui where a family was so close to losing their property, a property of high value. Their property taxes were $38,000 a year, you know, and they were just common folks. One of the members of their family approached the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. This was before I was even appointed. I know of this incident from last year. And she worked with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs with Lucy Meyer, just a very, very qualified person. And it was determined that this property was Kuleana land. And Kuleana land gets to be exempted from property taxes. So today, those owners do not pay any property taxes. And they were able to keep their land. They were so close to having to sell it because they could not pay $38,000. You know?
What a great savings. You know, a lot of people don't know the benefit of Kuleana land, but the first thing is many people don't really know even what Kuleana land is.
Right, right. I mean, it's based on the Kuleana Act, right? Back in, I have some of the details on that. In 1848, right, when the Mahele occurred, some of the land was granted to our native Hawaiian people, what we call Hawaiian native tenants, in fee. And it's the first time, right? The Mahele was the first time that fee, simple land ownership was introduced in Hawaii. Up to that point, our ali'i were responsible in trust for the land and for the managing of the land. No one owned land. But because of Western influences and contact, the ali'i decided that perhaps we need to go and adopt a type of Western land type ownership. So they did the Kuleana Act. In 1848 was the Mahele, and then 2 years later, the Kuleana Act of 1850 was enacted by the legislature of our Hawaiian Kingdom at that time. That would have been under Kamehameha III. Third's rule, and it was designed to allow tenant farmers to obtain fee simple title to the lands in which they were residing. All sections of this act, and this is such an interesting history because the Kuleana Act of 1850, all sections have subsequently been, you know, repealed and taken away, with the exception of Section 7. I think specifically it's 7-1, where lands are granted subject to the rights of native tenants, allowing them to farm or have access to waterways or to gather needed plant life. And it goes on to give these rights to our historical native tenants. And you've been in real estate, so you know that when you sell land, that's always something that you need to inform the purchaser of land that exists here in Hawaii.
Yes.
Then a really interesting tidbit is that in 1978, the state constitution was amended to say that the state has a duty to preserve and protect all of these rights for us as Hawaiians. So I think maybe what you're doing now is just going ahead and making use of this Section 7 and educating our people about it.
Yes. Well, we have these workshops that have gone completely around the state. We did Maui, we did Molokai, Kauai, and next week we're doing 4 workshops on the Hawaii Island.
Wow.
You know, we will be going to Hilo, Puna, Kona, and Waimea. So they're excited about having us. And what's more exciting is these workshops have been full of our people. They're very interested in this.
Sure.
You know?
You know, I think for a long time there's been a call for protection for the Kuleana lands. And I remember several years ago it came up, and there were some concern being expressed by non-Hawaiians when they found out that these Kuleana parcels were all over the islands, that Hawaiians had an absolute right to live there, and other rights as well. In fact, as Manu was saying, the Kuleana Land Act passed in 1850, but as Hawaii moved forward in time, this law continued to be brought forward. That's why it's in the state constitution, Article 12, Section 7. But it's also in Hawaii Revised Statute 7-1, the rights you read, and Section 1-1. So this is not an old law, 1850, coming forward, but our Constitution and our current statutes recognize it. Sometimes people say, well, you know, we're going to be losing private lands. Thousands of acres will go to Hawaiians. This is really false. If you know the history of our land loss, the mahele occurred in 1848. Within 2 years, it was very clear that all the foreigners, Americans, Europeans, were registering all the lands. Hawaiians, many of them were not able to register the land because you had to pay cash money to have your land surveyed, and they had none. How could they? You know, the first coin of the realm, which was a penny, was coined, I think it was 2 years before they were requiring you to pay the survey fees. But most Hawaiians didn't even have a coin of the realm. It was just being printed up, and the only coin they had for years was 1 penny. The thing was, what really occurred, the Kuleana Land Act was only for men. Hawaiian society was matrilineal. If you read the Kuleana Land Act, it says male adults may register. So in one fell swoop, all Hawaiian women in a matrilineal society were disenfranchised of their land. There were 29,200 Hawaiian males alive in 1850. Only 7,500 registered land, a total of 28,000 acres in our entire state. Less than 1% of the lands of our peoples are protected in this way. And their rights are significant. If you're a Kuleana landowner and you can work with this project, you have certain rights. Reasonable access to your land, agriculture use, including kalo, traditional gathering rights, a house lot, 1/4 acre in size, which is a pretty large house, sufficient water for drinking and irrigation, and also fishing rights on the kunalu, which is the Hawaiian word for the reef, beach area. So there's significant Hawaiian rights if people can protect their Kuleana lands. What is the OHA workshop focusing on, and what kind of things are you looking at in the workshop, Sulu?
We're working on checking whether their lands qualify and trying to show them how it becomes qualified. One must meet 2 broad criteria to qualify for the Kuleana property tax exemption. The land must have been transferred to a maka'ainana during the mahele period as a land commission award, or as a royal patent grant. The present-day owner must prove lineal ties to the original awardee named in the Land Commission Award or Royal Patent Grant. So our people are almost working one-on-one with our staff is working one-on-one with our people to help them. Every case is different. So they're giving them leads on how they can find their lineal background, to the person that actually received this.
So wouldn't this require genealogy?
Yes.
Genealogy work?
It does. And the Office of Hawaiian Affairs has the Papakilo database.
What is that?
That's a genealogy base. And it is so filled with information. All you need to do is feed it and it'll answer you. It's very difficult to describe here, but we also introduce it into our workshops, and the people are just floored. Our people can't believe that we have that kind of database.
Is it your own database, or is it connected to the state database over at Vital Statistics where
No.
they record births, deaths? No.
It's our
it's
own.
Your own.
It was our own, developed at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and it is available online.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so this is taught our people in the workshops. They're just blown away. They love it.
One of the things that you find when you study Hawaii law is this phenomenon of the lost kuleana. And it occurs because the kuleanas were smaller parcels of homesteaders within larger ahus. And what happened, people's great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents got this in the mid-1800s, and then people died, people moved, and families lost the location of their lands. But the term lost kuleana doesn't mean that you've lost your land rights. What it means is you need to go back to the big parcel and find where in the big parcel is your little house lot.
Right.
And there are ways you can do it. As you're saying, I think number one, the genealogy
Yes.
is where you're going to begin. But I remembered a few years ago in Maui, there were some families who were trying to find kuleana. They knew that they were in larger parcels, but they didn't know where. And one family had a photo of their great-great-grandmother and grandfather sitting in this little shack, sitting on the stone steps in their little shack. And in this photo, he told us, this was my great-great-grandparents' hale. We know it was somewhere in this valley, but we don't know where. And we also know that next to the house, they had their graves. Well, they organized everyone in the family. They started with a family reunion, and they went and walked that entire valley, weekend after weekend, and they found in the middle of the tall grass, next to a bunch of bushes, they found the remains of the stone staircase that
Wow.
matched to the photo. So there are many ways that folks can look for evidence of a lost kuleana. Your genealogy, your title. But what kind of things did your ohana do? If they planted lo'i, and that is why there's special allowance for agriculture for kalo, the thing is you only plant lo'i in lo'i kalo. So you should be able to find some walls. You should be able to find awai, the irrigation ditches. This is a good project. What kind of feedback are you getting from the folks that attended?
Oh, they want us to come back. When you first introduce this, they need to go home and do homework. They need to go research their lineal relatives all the way back to the 1850s. When they're done, they want to see the staff again. They want to see OHA. So we are contemplating making arrangements to go back on a second round. They have all kinds of suggestions they want to add to the Papakilo database. We have some genealogists in our beneficiaries, and they have offered this help,
What would happen? Is this a possibility where you're able to find your genealogy and you're able to trace back to a certain land area, and you're able to find that area, and there is already someone living there? There is always. Does that happen? Is that, I don't understand how, if that's a possibility, or all of this land is still within families?
I believe it's within families. That is what we're working on at this time. We have had another occasion where a young man came to me in Maui and told me that his aunt gave him the parcel, you know, and it's lineal. It's still within the same family. Now, all he needs to do is trace back, go back into the family and go back to the 1850s.
Well, my question is more based on that right, you know, and that right when you sell, you know, property, when you're a real estate agent and you let people know who are buying the property, you know, it's still subject to the rights of native tenants.
Yes.
So that's my question is has OHA had an experience where they have found land yet that's already changed hands and has gone into another family, whether it be Native Hawaiian or not? And then these Hawaiians who have done the research are saying that's actually our kuleana. So, you know, and then they're going to be actually for the first time exercising maybe that right.
Maybe during their lifetime. But, you know, in this respect, there's significant case law in Hawaii. These things have actually happened where people said, wait a minute, I bought this parcel. I'm living here. I'm doing business. But the kuleana landowner who is not in residence but shows the lineal tie comes back, finds the homestead area. The law requires that they not only be allowed to have access, i.e. a roadway in, but that they be allowed to rebuild their home, start their cultivation.
Yeah, that's what I was
also,
wondering.
That they are exempt from taxes, which is a real big exemption. That's a big push. You know, as we come down to the end of our show, I know the kuleana land piece is probably the most important, but I can't close this show without talking about the Palawea cultural the resolution of the Palawea issue, which will protect significant cultural resources, a big win. And I'm wondering if you can tell us about that. We do have a graphic on Palawea for those of you who might not know about it, but this is another happy story.
Thank you, Mililani. Yes, 12 years ago, the Palawea developers went before the County of Maui for approvals, and they were asked to set aside cultural land for preservation, and they did so. 20.75 acres of preserve was set aside in the McKenna area. Now, for 12 years, the developer has tried to transfer this property to an entity, particularly the University of Hawaii. But for whatever reason, the university did not accept it. And earlier this year, the chancellor of the University Maui campus asked to meet with me, and I did so meet with him. And he told me about this 20.75 acres of cultural land, and I was so excited, you know. So I did go to the Hawaiian Studies program in Maui, to Kiope Raymond and Kaleikoa, and I discussed it with them, and they said, oh, this has been happening for so long. They've been, you know, hoping to get it, but didn't. So finally, I did approach our Board of Trustees and ask them if we would consider taking this and returning it to the University of Hawaii Hawaiian Studies program and have them steward the property. And that was very exciting. You know, I listened to some of their visions, which was also exciting. You know, they've actually walked the land. Our Hawaiian teachers have walked the land, and they have ideas. They would like to have visiting students and you know, people from even New Zealand come over and visit and hands-on and you know, spend the time studying our culture here in Hawaii.
You know, I think I'm so glad to see this. When I first learned about Palawea, it was because I had gone down to McKenna and that whole place was being developed very rapidly and for resort and other things. And here was this parcel filled with endemic species, vili and many other things. Years have elapsed, and this is really good news. I'm so happy to see this collaboration with our Hawaiians up, Keopi Raymond and others, a good man up at the university. This is a good collaboration. Now, Hulu, what can we expect in the future? Folks from Maui are interested. Is there some kind of follow-up or contact yourself or the historic preservation folks at OHA?
Well, I think first we need to, we just received a donation letter from the developer, and there's some conditions that needs to be completed before we can even receive it in deed. So we need to cross that bridge before we move any further, and I believe the Office of Hawaiian Affairs will do legal documents with the University of Hawaii, and at that point, then our Hawaiian Studies program will be able to go into the community, ask for collaboration, and it's just going to be a wonderful project once it gets on the ground.
Yeah, I'm really happy about it. This is a good one.
And so more corporations need to take that into consideration, say, how can we be good stewards? Let's donate part of our land holdings to events like this.
That would be great.
Yeah, that would be great.
You know, I think in the future we need to watch this unfold, because this is going to be a prototype model maybe that we can follow to protect other areas and to bring together this collaboration with OHA, folks at the university, and Dowling. Wasn't it Dowling?
It was Mr. Everett Dowling,
Yep.
yes.
I'm so happy to see that. Well, you know, we're coming to the end of our show. I just want to say for myself, I'm very happy once again to see our governor lifting the restriction. I think it gives us all a good opportunity to vote for you. I certainly will be myself. And I think that what we need to be doing on our next show is taking a look at some of the election issues and those who are going to be running. Especially, I'd like to take a look at where we're going to go on some of the more contentious races, not only OHA, but I think we're going to be looking at some big races. Linda Lingle and others are going to be coming up. So I think we'll be dedicating our next show not only to looking at the OHA races and the ethical complaints, but also looking at where Hawaii might be going depending on who is going to be our governor. In any event, thank you for coming to the First Friday show.
Thank you.
We'll be following up with you. Remember, you heard it first on the First Friday show. Good night.
Good night.
Aloha.
Good show.